Hi there, troops. This is Jeff Evely, Ops Sgt-Maj for Veterans for Freedom. I'm back with you now, and I have with me Catherine Christensen, who is the founder and owner of Valour Law out in Alberta there. This first came up on my radar maybe like last year. I wasn't really aware of them. They've been around for about 7 years, and they've just set up a legal fund for members of the Canadian Armed Forces that are seeking legal advice and legal services. And I happen to think this is a really valuable service that we really need in Canada. All of the indications that we have right now is that the complaint system in the military is utterly dysfunctional. That was my experience with the complaints process throughout the course of my 20-year career. I think the last 3 ombudsmen that we had all resigned saying the same thing, that the chain of command simply can't police itself, but somehow the chain of command continues to evade any kind of independent oversight. And we all know that the ombudsman's office is essentially impotent. They don't actually administer any processes. They can just sort of advise. And so they'll advise complainants and they'll advise the chain of command. But at the end of the day, the chain of command, they don't have any teeth. They don't have any means of compelling the chain of command to actually follow their own rules. And so they don't. So then it becomes kind of a legal matter, and it's always the case that the chain of command is fully aware of the fact that the complaints processes are much slower than their own decision making, and so people end up with a lot of having to live with a lot of these bad decisions. The latest of which appears to be the vaccine mandate in the Canadian military. The fact of the matter is, no matter how good a case you present, they can still deny it, and you'll be living with the decision of being 5F'd, which is tantamount to being fired or dishonorably released, before even the initial authority gets a look at your grievance, because they're doing this 30 days and out stuff that is just absolutely ruthless with our young people. So we thought we'd bring Catherine on here to talk a little bit about what she's been seeing on the legal end of things coming out of our troops and the people that are still left there in this institution, because we know there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially in the mainstream press. So we like to bring the receipts around here and go straight to the horse's mouth. So we brought Catherine on here today to tell us a little bit about her experience throughout this, and give us a little bit of the broader view as well. So Catherine, with that, I think I'll just kind of hand it over to you, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about what inspired you to set up Valour Law and what brings you here today.
Well, thanks for having me on, Jeff.
My pleasure.
I initially was introduced to military law in law school. I was taught by 2 JAG officers, one active duty, one retired. And they wanted me to do something with the military. I had been a registered nurse for 22 years before I went to law school. And so I wasn't going to pass the physical because I had injured my back to join JAG. And looking back on it, I'm really glad that I didn't make a decision to join JAG. So I proceeded to design my career. I articled with a retired light colonel who was a lawyer. His wife had retired from the military as well. She was a lawyer. There was another lawyer in there that was from the Navy. So I got my military lingo speak up really quickly. And then when I was called to the bar, I opened my own law practice and focused on representing members of the military with various legal issues. So that I was told I was crazy. That there was no need for it. Members of the military and veterans were not so special that they needed someone to focus on just their issues. I disagreed, and time has proved me right. My practice is very busy, and and then my reputation, especially here at CFB Edmonton, was such that when the mandate was coming back in October, when people saw the writing on the wall, they started reaching out to me. And I was not certain that it was something that could even be disputed, because the reputation is nobody wins against the government. Mm-hmm. The government will outspend you. They will maneuver around you. They'll change the rules in the middle of the game, all of which is true. but then they started telling me their stories, and I was devastated. I'd already been watching the Canadian Armed Forces for abuses for years, and the mandate just happened to be a perfect example of the abuse of power in the Canadian Armed Forces. The sexual misconduct stuff can be rooted down to an abuse of power. Some of this other, all these other things that were happening, but then there's this nice bundle with the vaccine mandate, and with the stories, I was like, no, I can't sit back. My own profession of law, no one was acting on it. We aren't constitutional lawyers like they are in the U.S. Probably because we're too new at having a constitution. You know, they've had a couple hundred years to hold their government to account.
That makes sense.
We've only had 40. So I decided to take it on. And as of today's date, I officially have just under 300 in the class action or main lawsuit. There's another 100 waiting for me to take them on. And then there's other lawsuits coming forward as well that aren't related to the vaccine mandate, but as people get to know that we're out there. Because the reality is that people can't afford to sue the government. I spoke to a constitutional lawyer in the United States who took on cases with people who didn't have the resources to take on the government. I asked him how he did it. And he explained to me that he had a nonprofit. Donations are made to a general fund, and then they decide what cases they're going to take. So I followed that model, and it happened to be all set up and sitting there when the vaccine mandate cases came to me in October last year. So the Valour Legal Action Center is what we created to be a nonprofit to help people. They make a donation, and then we take on their case. And this, if they can't make a donation, they can make payments or whatever. I don't want money to be a reason that they can't seek justice from our courts. Our court system is as broken as CAF is, but it's what we've got, and that's the tool we need to use because that's what we've got. So.
Yeah, and you know, there's really nobody coming to save you when you're you're up against the chain of command. I've had that experience many times in my career, and you know, I'm glad you mentioned the sexual misconduct piece. I was, a warrant officer and an MWO when we were doing all that, starting in 2015, and I paid very careful attention to everything that they were saying and what was coming out in the news, some of the court cases, the courts martials, and because I was the guy that presented on all this stuff, so. Anyway, I made it my business to kind of properly apprise myself of all the material around this subject. And what I saw was a kind of dog and pony show for the press. And it's been my position now. It's so confused at this point. It's tough to really discuss this issue in rational terms. But the fact of the matter is the statistics are way down. So in terms of actual criminal sexual assault, they've been cut in half since like the early 90s. But what they're doing in their reporting right now, even with the StatsCan reports, is they're using these expanded definitions. So they're using terms like sexual misconduct, which includes things like an unwanted sexual advance, as in an offer for a date that maybe wasn't desired. So it really kind of gets into some of the muddier waters there when we're looking at the numbers, because those numbers are for an expanded definition of sexual assault, I guess, because they're not even calling it that. They're calling it misconduct. So it creates this perception that this problem is getting worse and worse and worse, when in fact the victimization numbers have been going down. And it's kind of been my position in terms of what I've been able to evaluate from the behaviors of the chain of command throughout this, is that there was an observation made, I'll say, by the External Review Authority into Sexual Misconduct 2015. That was former Supreme Court Justice Marie Deschamps, and she said that based on now there were a lot of problems with that report, but one thing that she did report was that there was a widespread perception within the ranks that the chain of command would not take complaints about sexual misconduct seriously, and that they would probably, kind of circle the wagons around the leadership to protect the reputations of the senior ranks involved, and throw that complainant under the bus essentially and scapegoat them. And I would say that perception persists to this day, and it existed well before 2015. But it's not necessarily limited to the problem of sexual assault or sexual misconduct. It is just the case that no matter the complaint that is filed, the complainant will be treated as a troublemaker, and the chain of command will kind of throw them under the bus and scapegoat them, and protect the reputations of the people involved. And yeah, it doesn't matter if it's about, a PER score or sexual misconduct. The object here is to maintain favorable optics for the senior leaders involved. So I guess I just like to get some commentary on that. That's kind of more my viewpoint than a question, but I wonder if you're not seeing similar trends with this kind of scapegoating of complainants in other areas as well.
Well, actually, it's a really good example of what they're doing with the vaccine mandate for people who chose not to be vaccinated, or maybe even coming with the boosters. I expect the boosters to be mandated as well. And in some ways they are, because if you're not boosted, you don't get to go on training or exercise or be deployed. So it's kind of a give or take. Definitely a circling of the wagons. But one thing I have to say about the sexual misconduct piece is there's real evidence that they're using that reason to get rid of people that don't follow the company line, if I could put it that way. Okay. Because I mean, I've represented people that were racist remarks were made to them, and then they were 5F'd for supposedly trying to kiss somebody. Right. The evidence couldn't withstand a court martial. Charges were thrown out, but then they came after them with the administrative process.
Right.
I got another guy who touched the foot of another person under a table of the opposite sex. He's being 5F'd. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I'm at a crowded table, I might touch somebody's foot. That's not sexual misconduct. That's your foot touch somebody's foot. So there's that side of it too. But circling the wagons definitely has happened with the mandate. Yeah. And I know that I've shared with you, they've done a little bit of a survey and discovered that anyone with the rank of colonel or above got accommodated. Whereas if you were below the rank of colonel, and I can tell you because of all these hundreds of people that I've spoken to, you didn't get accommodated. There's been very few accommodations granted in the Canadian Armed Forces. And I can tell you that the denials are boilerplate. They're not even.
I've seen one.
Yeah. Well, then you've seen them all because they all look the same.
Oh, yeah. You know what? And it's reminiscent of every grievance I've seen in my career. I filed about 10 myself in the last 15 years of my career, just kind of, refusing to be complicit in the corruption that I saw. And I was a party to several others as an assisting member, and I did one as an assisting officer, even though I was just a warrant at the time, but I managed to get the guy a 3A instead of a 5F, with some help. And I just find that I remember reading the James Formosa's response letter here on the podcast, because he shared that with us. And here's a good article that you sent me here. I'm kind of starting to track these guys. Rare. I wasn't familiar with them before they interviewed me in Ottawa, but they seem to be on top of things. They seem to be on the right side. And I found that the interview that I did was just great. I thought the guy was really good. And they're talking about James right here. He's one of our Veterans for Freedom. He's our Ottawa correspondent. And he actually looked up the statistics, it says here in this article. I'm just going to read this for our viewers here. So the title is Exclusive COVID Vaccine Exemption Scandal Exposed in Canadian Military Interview. The Canadian military appears to be issuing vaccine exemptions according to rank and geography rather than merit. In an exclusive interview for Rare Foundation USA, former Canadian Forces soldier James Formosa revealed how he believes the military is issuing vaccine exemptions according to rank rather than on a case-by-case basis according to merit. Formosa, a captain in the 3rd Canadian Division, a regiment posted in Western Canada, served from April 2017 to July 2022, when he was formally discharged due to the decision to apply for a religious exemption from the vaccine mandate, which was denied. Due to his refusal to comply with the mandate, which came into force in October 2021 and was officially put on hold in June 2022, Formosa received an honorable discharge from his military career and has appealed his dismissal. Under new rules, it will no longer be compulsory for military personnel to declare vaccine status. However, on his way out, Formosa discovered some startling statistics that again indicate one set of rules for the little people, you and me and the lower ranks of the military, and another set of rules for those in charge. Justin Trudeau is a good example, perhaps, with his recent maskless flight to Costa Rica for a holiday, while travelers aboard planes leaving and arriving in Canada must wear a mask. Using the Army intranet, accessible to anyone with a military email address, Formosa tracked exemption requests according to rank and geography. He discovered that there was a 14.6% approval rate among military captains. For majors, the rate climbed to 55%, and for lieutenant colonels, it was 100%. Rank has its privileges, but also seems that geography plays a role as well. He discovered that certain postings, such as those to the policy branch at 1st Division Air HQ in Ottawa, meant that exemption requests were 3,000 to 5,000% more likely to be approved. These are big boys clubs in Ottawa that most of us are not part of, but if you did happen to be posted to one of these locations, your likelihood of keeping your career was 3,000 to 5,000% more likely based on a breakdown of where approvals were actually happening, said Formosa. Quote, meanwhile, in Western Canada, my approval rate was so close to zero as possible. Was as close to zero as possible, close quote. About 96% of the Canadian military has been fully vaccinated, but a draft copy of the vaccine policy document shows that 1,300 personnel requested exemptions. More than 1,000 of these were denied, according to an article in the Ottawa Citizen. A spokeswoman for the Department of Defense noticed, Department of National Defense, Department of Defense is U.S., that to July 21st, 2022, 166 accommodations had been granted, 101 for religious reasons, 44 for medical reasons, and 21 for other reasons. She went on to write, quote, in accordance with CAF policies, exemptions for medical and religious beliefs or any other prohibited grounds of discrimination as defined in the Canadian Human Rights Act to COVID-19 vaccination are recognized. In such circumstances, applications will be evaluated by the appropriate professionals on a case-by-case basis, close quote. However, Formosa doesn't buy this. Prior to discharge, he became a troop commander for several months and was responsible for teaching the men under his command, men and women under his command. He told them about the theory of Yuri Bezmenov, a KGB press and propaganda agent who defected to Canada in 1970, whereby Marxist subversion would eventually work through Western institutions. Formosa asked them to think about how this might apply to their lives. Quote, I was warned in a progress report that I was giving soldiers training that was not relevant, close quote, recalls Formosa. He suspects that his final 3 to 4 months of service spent sitting at a desk with absolutely nothing to do, quote, no tasks at all, close quote, had something to do with this. Quote, I was still forced into early retirement from the Canadian Armed Forces due to a policy that had been officially rendered unenforceable weeks before they decided to retire me anyway, close quote. He tells viewers on his YouTube channel. According to the updated vaccine policy, those Canadian Armed Forces members who are released due to vaccine status or whose cases have been through administrative review and face further release dates will still be discharged, but they can reapply. Who honestly believes they're going to get fair treatment a second time around? Not this guy, I know that. So they're kind of reporting, I guess, this is very common in my experience too, when you're kind of rocking the boat in some way or engaging in a complaints process. You'll find that these other processes like your feedback reports and things like that all kind of light up in a way that makes your life a lot harder for you.
Yeah.
And that's an abusive process, but that's very common, at least in my own observations. And James makes a very astute observation here in the differentiation, preferential treatment given to senior ranks with respect to their exemptions. I can't say that I'm surprised by that at all either. And they're talking 1,300 personnel. But I think you and I were talking that maybe that number is a little bit diminished out there in what they're reporting right now in the press. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'd say it's closer to 3,000.
3,000, huh?
Yeah.
And would you say that many people are being reasonably accommodated there? Is there any way you can give us some kind of a breakdown?
No, it's really, really low, and especially if you use their numbers, but you use the 3,000, we're down to like hardly any. I could count on one hand people who have been accommodated.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah. I mean, just this morning, someone wrote to me. I get a lot of people sending me stuff anonymously these days, but confirmed that someone under his command was given a medical exemption by a military doctor who said he could not have the vaccine for medical reasons, and he was still told he had to get it, and they were going to give him 2 weeks between shot 1 and shot 2, which doesn't even follow the guidelines. I mean, you're just asking for a problem,
right,
to do that.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to clarify is this article says about the mandate, it still exists. It was never removed. There was a draft put out by, deliberately, I believe, put out by a chain of command in June, trying to hint that they were going to remove the mandate or roll it back. Never happened. And they're still declaring. I've got confirmation that even the boosters, petty officers on the Atlantic Command, are going around asking about who's had the boosters and who hasn't, and these lists exist. Right. So talk about no confidentiality of medical information. Chain of command shouldn't know anything about your medical. They should just know if you dag green or not. That's all I need to know. I don't need to know why. But that's been thrown out the window with the COVID-19 stuff.
They were never really very good with that, to be perfectly honest. And just in my own experience, kind of leading up to my own medical release, mostly for like mental health issues, they are still treating every mental health issue like a disciplinary issue. And, I know in my own experience, like what they're supposed to do, there's a policy out there. It's, very well articulated, that you get like a CF 2020 or 2088, if I'm not mistaken. That is your limitations. And that is expressed to your commanding officer. Now, those documents are supposed to stay with your commanding officer. And if there's any need to clarify medical limitations, then your commanding officer is to go back to the base surgeon and clarify directly with him. Right. But in my case, these documents came all the way down to my immediate supervisor. And then he's even seeing like my medical history and starting to tell me that I shouldn't be doing things like marches because of a back injury that I had like several years ago and stuff like that. And I'm like, this is between me and my doctor, and this is none of your business. And you guys are breaching my privacy and discriminating against me, like essentially on the basis of prohibited grounds.
Well, here in Edmonton, when Alberta issued the vaccine cards that you had to have to go into a restaurant or something on that line, of course, military medical system is not in the Alberta healthcare system. No. So in order to give people in CAF a card, I heard it directly from someone who witnessed this. They sent a bunch of corporals in who are not in the medical branch to go through people's medical files. They had full access in order to issue them the cards.
Wow.
So
need to know.
I told you I used to be a nurse. Can I tell you what happened to my brain when I heard that? It was like, what? Like, confidentiality. You get fired from any medical job for letting someone see a file. I would lose my license to practice law if someone had free and unlimited access to my files, it shouldn't be seeing what are in my files, right? So, yeah, talk about monitor mass was bad enough. Let's put it this way: the vaccine status in monitor mass was bad enough.
That's right too. You know, I almost forgot about that. They were putting it in monitor mass so that the entire chain of command, right down to your immediate supervisor, could just go in there and look and see your medical information. So all of the principles that we sign up to defend were, trampled all over throughout the course of this pandemic, right down to bodily autonomy. I mean, if you don't own your own body,
Admiral Topshee, I have it in a document signed with his fancy signature that says there is no such thing as bodily autonomy.
Wow.
So and then he got promoted to commander of the Navy.
Yeah.
If there's no bodily autonomy, then what stops the CDS from making all kinds of demands? If he can order you to have a vaccine, which he could under the National Defense Act 126, they can order it, but he didn't use 126, and because they couldn't risk courts martial on this, because you get out of 126 by saying you have reasonable excuse, and when these people start putting their sincere beliefs, and that's been tested by law in our Supreme Court, sincere belief is acknowledged in Canada. They were risking getting 3,000 non-vaccinated military people, their charges thrown out. So they went the administrative process. You know?
That's the kind of greasy shenanigans that I would expect too. I've been through that myself, even with a complaints process on my own, and there's all this stuff where they're trying to intimidate you with things like courts martials and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, okay, let's do a courts martial. Let's get all this on the record. Let's put it all out there and see what really happened here.
Let's put it against the rule of law evidence rules. And I know some of my people, they're using threats of courts martial against them for other things. When they can't get them on one thing, they'll try another. And, they'll contact me, and what do I do? And I said, opt for the court martial. Let's take it into court. Let's go. First of all, you're not going to get a hearing till September 2023, because that's what the next available space, and chances are it's going to get thrown out before it ever gets there, because they can't risk the information being tested. Because then their theory goes long.
That's exactly it. They can't. We can't have them being held accountable. I mean, that's why they're skirting the law, like 126, and why they're going administrative means instead of, because they keep saying this was an order from the Chief of Defense Staff. Okay, so disobedience of a lawful command, right? That's a court martial offense. So
why aren't they court martialing for that?
That's right. It's all very slimy and underhanded. It's so they can abuse these people without ever being held to account.
Right.
That's
what we're here. Well, that's what my group is here for.
Well,
We've decided enough is enough. Thank you very much, General Air, for giving us such a good example. It's a nice, solid, round example to come after you with. I mean,
your job easy.
Yeah, and when the article mentions, I keep hearing this in the mainstream press, people can reapply.
Yeah.
Here's what the public doesn't know, right? Is that if you are 5F'd, the only way you're getting back in is with the permission of the Chief of Defense Staff. The same guy who goes on the mainstream media and calls these people all kinds of nasty names. You think he's going to let anybody back in? To be honest with you, they don't want back in. But if nobody
wants to work with them,
he's not going to let them come back in.
No.
And let's face it, a 5F is the same. If you're convicted of rape in the military, you get 5F'd. Yeah,
that was Russell Williams' article of release, the serial killer colonel.
He was higher up, the one something. But
was he?
Yeah,
I thought he was 5F.
Admiral Edmondson, who's been convicted of rape, is sitting in a transition center building up his pension before they 5F him. Yeah.
100%.
So, but to say I don't want a medical treatment, because that's what this is. It's a medical treatment. I choose not to have it. And you're in the same category. You've got a moral weakness and you can't serve in the military.
Yeah.
That doesn't fit. To me,
That's
in my mind, it doesn't fit. Yeah.
That's what the 5F says. It
Yeah.
says due to some character deficiency or blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And that's the boilerplate, like you say.
Mhm.
They'll just pull it right out of the policy and say, you're not good enough to serve Canada.
Yeah. And I would say these people are probably the ones I want serving Canada, because they're standing by it. They have a moral compass and they're standing by it.
That's right.
And if you're going to have a military, how about we have one of those instead of what we got?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because what's happened effectively is a Stalinist purge of the ranks, where all of the independently minded people, anybody who had the courage to stand up and say that there's something wrong with this, they're all being purged. And all that are left are just the regime's loyalists who will do and think whatever they are told. So I find that this is, a very precarious situation that we're in here with the military at this moment in our history. And all I can say is that I'm thankful for the fact that they're essentially ruined at this point and can't really conduct operations.
I agree. Canada sits defenseless. Let's be honest.
Yep.
We have so many pilots that are grounded right now. We don't have an Air Force. I've spoken to the sniper crew out here in Edmonton at 3PPCLI. They tell me they've got between 3 and 5 snipers for Western Canada. I don't know. My geography is pretty good. I don't think 3 to 5 snipers can cover us.
No.
Infantry. Now, when Ukraine started up, they needed 100 infantry from Edmonton. They couldn't come up with 100 infantry that they could spare. If you can't get 100 people out of a military, that's
who's going to fill the sandbags?
Yeah.
When the flood comes, who's going to fill the sandbags?
The fires last year. They couldn't. They were scrambling so bad. They even called in the unvaccinated to run the base here because they didn't have enough people to fight fires in BC.
Yeah.
So don't tell me we have an effective military.
And nobody wants to.
They're quoting numbers. I'm hearing about 48,000 is the actual number we have. And we've lost in the past year about 12,000.
Wow.
We don't have 12,000 to spare in the Canadian Armed Forces.
It was already falling apart before the vaccine mandate.
So even the 3,000, when they first came to me last fall, and I said, they'll never survive losing 10% of their workforce. So no business person will risk losing 10% of their workforce all at once.
Right.
You can't survive that way. So even if you use a different model, it still doesn't. And money loss, we calculated it a while ago at cost of training lost in these mandates is about $1 billion. And we're actually revamping that to more like $2 billion. Like what could the Canadian Armed Forces have done with $2 billion of properly trained people? And the problem they've got is they can't recruit anybody. Recruitment's way down. And they don't have these skilled people to train them when they do come in.
That's right. And there was another kind of ruthless mandate that didn't get as much attention back in the day. And that was the implementation of the universality of service by General Hillier, who was still the best general in my career. And I remember when they were coming out with that, and the buzzword of the day was, if you're not deployable, you're not employable. And watching my warrant officer class, the senior NCO class, put these little signs up that say, if you're not deployable, you're not employable, in their office windows. And they're walking around with no medals on their chest, never having deployed anywhere. So it was all kind of a farce, but I was really happy to see it because when I first got in 2001, I mean, they weren't doing their jobs. They weren't going to PT. They were all out of shape and, lazy and inept. And so when they started cracking down, I was like, yeah, you know what? We really got to clean up the ranks around here. Like, this is really bad. And, I saw them all kind of bowing out like, oh, my back, I can't run. And, well, where's your medical chit? And a lot of this stuff that was kind of gross to bear witness to. But then what ended up happening a little bit further into the war is that all the guys, the war veterans, like the guys who signed up, were probably already fit when they came in the door and were volunteering to go to Afghanistan, as opposed to the generation that was in previously, where they were taking beer tours in Cyprus and the Golan Heights to avoid having to go to Afghanistan. Those guys, those war veterans, like, they're all gone. So all the lessons learned, like about IED disarmament and things like that, those skills are all lost. And all the people who gain the kind of insight required to grow wise as senior leaders, they're gone. And that's kind of what we have right now, is a generation of very unwise leaders at the top who didn't even go to war when they were coming of age themselves. I see that as being a real problem for a lot of the guys my age. I can remember even having to do suicide watch for a guy with less than 5 years in the military and 3 tours in Afghanistan. And, I knew that the MPs were taking him back to his home base in Ontario because he was AWOL. And, I knew that when he got back there, he was probably going to be up against some hammer-headed sergeant major to whom every problem looks like a nail, who would treat him as a disciplinary issue instead of a mental health issue. And sure enough, he was back in my neck of the woods and back in jail in no time, because, like I said, they just treat every little issue as a disciplinary issue. And they don't seem to have any appreciation for the kinds of struggles that a lot of the troops are facing as a result of their service, because they didn't end up getting driven off into the meat grinder of history, and they don't have a large swath of their peer groups that fell on the battlefield. So there tends to be a lack of appreciation for those struggles, I think, at the highest levels. But speaking of,
I was just going to say, well,
yeah, speaking of these self-righteous, narcissistic leaders,
I give you Exhibit A.
Exactly. So here's General Eyre himself on the West Block, and let's see what he has to say.
Now, welcome, General Eyre. We spoke to you before as the acting chief of the Defense Staff. You are now actually the chief of the Defense Staff. Last time I saw you, you told me you didn't want this job, but here you are.
Well, I'm not sure anybody would want to have this set of circumstances, Mercedes, but I am honored to have been selected for this position, and I will do the best that I can for members of the Canadian Armed Forces and the people of Canada, because this is an incredibly important institution for our nation.
What makes you the right person to lead this change?
Well, I don't necessarily believe that I am the right person, and not one single person is going to be able to make the change that's required, because it's going to take a collective. Not one person has all the answers for what we need to do, and we've got to seek those solutions from wherever they may come from. And for every day that I continue to wear this uniform, I'm going to strive to make this institution better.
You say you may not be the right person. I know you from many years in command. You're a humble guy. Is that what you mean? Or what do you mean by you may not be the right person?
Well, what I mean is I will be doing the best that I possibly can to improve the Canadian Armed Forces each and every day, so it continues to deliver for the people of Canada. I don't have all the answers for what we're facing, and I am willing to and eager to seek those solutions from wherever they may be.
And I do know I've spoken with a number of survivors of military sexual misconduct who are quite happy to see you in the job. They believe, obviously, there have been mistakes made, as there always are, but they think that you seem to have good intentions to actually try to create change. And I want to talk to you about some of those, including how you select leaders, because one of the things was identified was there was toxic leadership at the top, and the military and the government themselves have talked about this, which suggests the process for choosing who leads people and sets the tone for the culture was problematic. How do you choose the right leaders going forward that can lead this change beyond just the chief's office? So
we've got a couple of initiatives underway. We've started with the general officer or flag officer selection this year in terms of adding more science to the process, psychometric testing, 360-degree feedback sessions where subordinates have a voice in the selection, in the determination if somebody's going to go forward, using it as a tool to identify potential flags. We are introducing inclusivity as a key determinant. So how do we measure, how do we assess inclusivity at all levels as well? Because in my view, as we look at culture change, that's one of the key aspects we have to look at. we've got some excellent aspects of our culture. You know, the willingness to be part of something bigger, the willingness to put oneself in harm's way, the willingness to serve selflessly, to leave your family behind, to go overseas and do great things. But it's the exclusionary aspects of our culture that need to be fixed. So how do we incentivize it? How do we assess it at the lowest levels is a very important step going forward.
There is a class action lawsuit settlement that is going forward. It closed just a few days ago for claims. There was almost 19,000 individuals who came forward, not total claims, but individuals making claims. Did that number surprise you, the scope?
I look at it from a number of different perspectives. So firstly, the scope speaks to the depth of the issue that we have to face, going back historically, but presently as well. The large number of people going forward also speaks to their willingness to do that, which should make us happy that they're willing to do that. Realizing, of course, that the act of even coming forward can re-traumatize some. I think it's also important to note that the latest stats I've seen, 42% are men. Mm-hmm. And that speaks to this not being just a woman's issue. It's an issue for all of us to address. It's an issue of power dynamics as well that speak to an element that we have to fix.
Yeah, I have the same number, and a lot of people talk about this as a women's issue, but it really goes to that fact, 42% of the claimants being male, certainly higher than I think a lot of folks expected or talked about, and that deeper institutional issue. One of the things that you've also talked about is that you're losing people over this. You're having especially leadership around the NCO rank who've been in for 15, 20 years, lots of experience, deciding to say, you know what, I'm just going to get out. I don't like how this institution looks, and it's actually affecting you potentially operationally. How do you convince those people to stay in, and how serious are the losses that you're sustaining right now?
So I'm always concerned about those mid-level ranks and their retention, because we've invested experience, we've invested skills, we've invested training in them. So yes, I am concerned because they are the heart of our organization. The ability to make the necessary changes resides at that level. So we need targeted retention. We need to encourage those that we've invested in to stay. And a lot of it is changing those aspects of our culture that are driving them out, because they are the future.
Admiral Art McDonald was the chief of the defense staff. He's who you had to take over from. There was the extraordinary situation.
Okay, I think that's probably good there. Yeah, I think I gave lots of warning on that one, guys. So anyway, if you're triggered, I think that's on you. Yeah, so
I can't wait to get into questioning with General Air.
Yeah. You know what? Yeah.
I'm told I have a veteran who works for me, and just after he started working for me, he's a couple of offices down from me, and I was doing a questioning on a case on video. So he couldn't hear what was being said to me, but he could hear me. And he came down the hall to my paralegal next to me and asked if everything was okay, because the voice that I had was scaring him.
Good.
So, yeah, the biggest compliment I ever got from another lawyer was she looks sweet as a peach, but she's brutal in court.
Oh,
I took that as a real compliment. So,
yeah, I think that is a compliment, actually. That's the kind of people that we need around here. And a lot of the comments that I'm getting in the chats here are to this effect, like this is something that we really need in Canada, because when the troops are up against wrongdoing in the chain of command and trying to do something about it, they are all on their own. I mean,
the beauty is I don't answer to the chain of command.
Exactly.
And my letterhead is pretty familiar in Ottawa. Mm-hmm. They're never happy to see it because I'm holding them to account. You know what? I would love it if there was no need for me. Mm-hmm. If everybody was playing by the rules and doing what they're supposed to do, I would be happy. I would love to have a military that doesn't need me sending letters to the CDS saying, you know, why is this widow needing to hire me to get what she is hers by right? Like, why is that happening? So, you know, as much as I'll give bad lawyer jokes as anybody, I would be really happy if nobody needed me. A couple comments that he made there that I wanted to address. Okay. He's in the process of removing dissent. For all of his talk there, he's really busy doing it. And you know what? Some of the generals are a perfect example of that, because any of the generals that put up argument that they did not have the legal, the medical, the ethical, or the moral right to bring in that mandate, being sexual allegations from years ago, you're gone. Because I've seen General Cadu wrote a briefing note to AIR saying he could not do the mandate. I've seen it. And now tell me what happened to General Cadu.
I don't know.
Sexual misconduct allegations.
Oh.
Yeah. What happened to General Fortin, head
Right.
of the public rollout?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, bing, 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 McDonald, Fortin, Cadu, all these people, sexual misconduct, right as the government wanted 100% vaccine
Right.
rate.
That's
As an
interesting.
example to the regular population. I have good intel from someone who actually worked in General Vance's office, and Vance is, I'm no fan of Vance, he's no fan of mine, but he was told 100% vaccination rate by the deputy minister, and he said no. He said, no, you're not using my people as an experiment.
Yeah.
What happens if there's something wrong with this vaccine and you wipe out my military?
Mm-hmm.
A few weeks later, what happened to General Vance? Sexual misconduct allegations of an affair that was no secret. Everybody knew about that affair. This was no big secret.
That's what I've been hearing.
So, yeah. So it's awfully convenient that, he talks about change and welcoming opinions and no.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of politics, General Ayer's wife is a chief of staff to a deputy minister in the Liberal government.
Yeah, I heard that too.
Yeah. So you want to talk about political connections here?
Yeah. He's a Liberal. There's no question about that. And
he admitted that years ago.
Yeah.
In front of a lot of people. That
Yeah.
He was just dyed in the wool Liberal. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he's kind of one of these loyalists, and based on what you just said, it sounds like he got the job of Chief of Defense Staff by being the only guy who would agree to coerce the force to participate in the clinical trials for this.
Which, by the way, is against the National Defense Act.
Yeah.
We can't use the military as an experiment.
No, and it's not the first time. I mean, there was Agent Orange back in the day. There was mefloquine in the 90s.
Very much so.
And now we have this. And you think they would take the lessons of history, but they just keep making the same mistakes. And I'm not surprised to hear that they're violating the National Defense Act, because it was my experience that those kinds of documents, whether they be law or policy, are sort of just window dressing. And the chain of command just kind of does whatever it is that they're going to do to protect their own career advancements.
Right.
And then they make up some BS to justify it. And it's never grounded in policy, as the CDS calls for in all decisions. It's always the case that it's kind of an opinion. James Formosa came on here and showed his decision letter, and they were basically saying, well, no, your claim to a spiritual exemption doesn't have any merit because you're a Christian, and no Christian authoritative body has come out against the vaccine.
Well, I'll give you some examples from my group. I've got chaplains who were 5F'd and were not given a religious accommodation. Now, if you are a Catholic priest serving Canada in the Canadian Armed Forces, try to tell me you don't have sincere belief.
Yeah, exactly.
And just because the Pope says it is not your personal belief. Or I've had people not granted an accommodation based on the wrong religion. Or couples who practice the same religion. One gets an accommodation, the other didn't.
Unreal.
Like,
there's no right and a reason to it.
No.
And really the mandate, it's not something you should be asking for an exemption for anyway, given the untested nature at this stage. There's no long-term data.
There's no approved vaccine because the clinical trials haven't ended yet.
Right. Yeah, I think they're ordered to be ongoing until 2026.
Yeah.
So, so there are all kinds of problems with imposing a mandate. And initially they had rolled this out as it will be available to anybody who wants it. And that quickly after the election there became politicized. And we can all see that it was politicized. And so we have the Canadian Armed Forces at the highest levels getting on board with a political agenda. And it's all, as far as I can see, for the purpose of saving face for the leaders and decision makers that were involved.
Well, and let's be realistic. How many COVID deaths were there in the Canadian Armed Forces?
I'm not aware of any.
Zero. Yeah. Zero. No one in uniform died of COVID. So now try to tell me why they're such a high risk group.
Yeah. And I've seen General Eyre saying, he can't understand why anybody as part of a team would want to put their team at risk like that, and so on and so forth. And it's the same sort of talking points that we're used to hearing that presupposes that natural immunity doesn't exist.
Right.
And that really has been, I think, the metric that they should have been looking for from day one. That's what I've been waiting for is, okay, what is the level of community spread? Yeah. Do we even know that to this day? So, he's, I wouldn't have taken that thing no matter what. And he's basically calling my character into question here. And yet
it's absolutely your right to say, I don't want this medical treatment.
Well, I've even had,
when I was a nurse, no one went to the OR unless they signed that consent and that they understood what that consent was. I've had cranky surgeons come and see me to explain to the patient again what the procedure is, because I wasn't let them sign an informed consent form unless they clearly understood what was going to be done and what were the risks. And we know for a fact that never happened. I have a former base surgeon who has the receipts to show he told them in February 2021 they did not meet the criteria for informed consent on a medical basis.
I've been saying that since day one. I can remember talking to one of my friends who was actually a very senior rank. And, he didn't even question it. He just kind of went out and got jabbed. And then we're sitting there and he's like, well, why the hell wouldn't you take it? And I started kind of listing off my reasons. And, he was giving me the TV talking points of proven safe and effective. And I'm like, well, where are the clinical trials? Where's the long-term data? What do you mean when you say? And once we kind of started parsing it out, at one point I just kind of looked at him. So did you give informed consent? And he was like, no. So that's really what's happening. There's a kind of a violation that's taken place. And this is all kind of, I think, sort of reminiscent about the kind of sexual assault that we saw back in the 90s, specifically quid pro quo, as in, if you want to keep this job, you better let me put something in your body. And, I'm not diminishing the experience of anybody who's been raped, not even a little bit, but it seems to me that it's probably within that category. And there's also an element to it that I'm not saying makes it worse on the whole, but the thing about being raped is that, survivor experiences vary. And some people, they're damaged forever. I would say probably most, but a lot of people, they move on. They can move on from something like that. It is possible. Whereas once you've taken this treatment that recodes your DNA, then there's really no going back from that. There's nothing you can do to kind of move on past that.
Well, and the vaccine injuries, and I would put to you that there's probably been some deaths that I'm working to confirm from the vaccine itself. Speak to that. Bodily autonomy is bodily autonomy, and it doesn't matter how your body is violated. It's an assault. I mean, that was made crystal clear to me in the medical community that if I did something to a patient that they did not want, I could be charged criminally with assault, and I could be sued civilly for assault.
Right.
And battery. Assault and battery are two different things. But so I have now, interestingly enough, I recently heard from someone who went to the booster. They were doing the booster shots, and to avoid getting the booster shot, they had suggested that they were waiting for the Omicron booster because they felt it would be mandated. It was just a stall tactic, but that's what they used. The Lieutenant Navy medical person said, well, none of the vaccines were mandated. There was no mandate. Excuse me?
Yeah.
Lieutenant Navy, you need to take another look because I am quite certain that there was a directive 2 or 3 that came down last fall.
That's right.
Before Christmas. So, yeah.
CDS
like,
directive
nobody's being
003.
released for that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is the tack that they're taking too. Is it's like it's disobedience of a lawful command, but like we said, they're not charging them with it. They're taking the administrative route in order to avoid oversight and accountability.
Well, and the administrative route it's supposed to be that you can remediate whatever it is that you've done wrong. You have if you have a drinking problem, they give you time to try and resolve that drinking problem. You get chances. There's none of this. The whole remedial measures piece doesn't fit this issue at all, because even if you decided to take the vaccine, you could not stop the process. You still ended up with remedial measures. Some people were still put on the path to a 5F.
Wow.
You see, it was, they couldn't succeed. Once the directives came out, they couldn't succeed.
No, and when you have something that toxic from so high up, it gains a lot of inertia, a lot of momentum. So it has inertia, and you just can't stop that machine once it starts moving fast enough to keep it from running people over.
Yeah.
Here's an article from Global here. I thought I'd throw up. So nearly 1,000 CAF members denied exemptions from COVID-19 vaccine mandates. So the Canadian military says over 3/4 of the more than 1,300 service members who applied for an exemption from the military's COVID-19 vaccine requirements have had their requests denied. I'm noticing they're using the word requirement there instead of mandate. Vice Chief of Defense Staff, Lieutenant General Francis Allen, revealed the figure during testimony to a parliamentary committee this week, in which she also sidestepped questions about what will happen to those troops if the vaccine requirement is lifted. Chief of Defense Staff General Wayne Eyre ordered all military personnel to be fully vaccinated by mid-October to protect the Canadian Armed Forces from COVID-19. The deadline was later extended to mid-December. While most service members complied with the order, with the Defense Department reporting more than 98% of Canadian troops had chosen to get vaccinated, hundreds of others did not. Allen told the House of Commons Defense Committee that of the more than 1,300 Armed Forces members who applied for an exemption from the requirement for medical or religious reasons, only 158 had their requests approved. And that's always tentative. As soon as they get posted to another unit, they got to go whole through the process again.
Yeah.
Of the remaining requests, Allen said that 980 were denied, while another 160 are still under review. Despite the large number of denials, only a handful of military personnel have been forced to hang up their uniforms to date. The Defense Department last week reported that 39 Armed Forces members have been involuntarily released since December, though another 206 are in the process of being forced out of the military. 94 full-time members have voluntarily hung up their uniforms rather than get vaccinated, the department added. The number of part-time reservists who have chosen to leave or are in the danger of being kicked out wasn't available. Senior commanders have also provided numerous warnings, counseling sessions, and other efforts to convince vaccine-resistant troops to change their minds and get their jabs. That's probably far enough into that article, I think, for our purposes here. You can see what they're spinning. They have these numbers that we don't really believe. For the 1,300, you're saying it's probably closer to 3,000, I think. Mm-hmm. The number that are being denied. I mean, it's just appalling to see the kinds of ruthless abuses that are taking place in there, and they'll get out in front of the cameras and say, "Oh yeah, we're so inclusive." But it's been my experience that when they say inclusive, what they really mean is exclusive.
Yes, I agree.
It's very exclusive to the kind of the wokesters, right? Yeah.
The other thing they're hiding here, Jeff, is that they pushed as many over to DMed pool to be a 3B release as they could find. If you even had a sprained ankle once during your career, they were putting you out on a 3B because it was DMCA was overwhelmed. They never expected the numbers that they were going to have to release. So they shove them over DMed pool. They tried to find something. So then also their numbers look good because, oh, we've got medical releases.
Right.
Because that's the other thing is that if they've been very careful, except some COs slipped up, very careful to say this is not a universality of service issue. Because if they say it is, then they have to 3B these people because they're medically not able to serve.
Right.
So, which comes with a whole raft of benefits. You got education benefits. You got 2 years of pay. Like that's a whole different thing than pushing someone on a 5F who maybe didn't take their pension payout in 2012 and now they don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's pretty unbelievable. Like the difference between a 3B and a 5F is substantial. Huge. It's huge. Like 3B is what you get as a disabled veteran. So you have like the full access to the highest tier of benefits available through VAC. And if you're 5F'd, well, then you're fired. You're no good. You're not even a veteran, unless I'm mistaken, because you have to be honorably released under the charter, the Veterans Charter.
You still get VAC benefits.
If you're 5F'd?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you still get your pension.
Okay.
That's kind of a you didn't used to, Jeff. They changed the 5F in the 7 years I've been practicing, specifically with military. They've changed the 5F. Because it used to say dishonorable. Yeah. And there used to be a lot of repercussions for it. Right. But in the last few years, they've tweaked it so that it doesn't actually say dishonorable. It says it's honorable, but you can't get a government job of any kind.
No.
If you, like I said, that payout in 2012, if you opted not to take it then and you're 5F'd, you lose it.
Wow.
That's tens of thousands of dollars for some people.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the pension payout that we're talking about here, they restructured the Canadian Armed Forces pension plan back in 2007. And now we have to do 25 years of service instead of 20. And it's more in line with the Public Service of Canada, which I think they need to do something like it's a formula of like 30 years plus their age. But anyway, one of the things that they brought in there was a pension payout, which it used to be the case that you would get this at the end of your career. You would pay in so much, and then at the end of your career, you would get this extra money. But what they did is they just capped it so that we our generations of veterans wouldn't get that. Same funding, and then they capped it, and then they tried to buy out a lot of people. They gave us the option. Basically, you can just kind of leave that money there until the end of your career, whatever you put into it, and then take it out at the end, or we can give you the whole thing now. And there was even an option to take half of it now and half of it at the end. Stuff like this, but it had everything to do with kind of restructuring the pension plan to make it a little bit more viable in light of things like longer life expectancy and so on and so forth. But if we're talking about the full amount being paid into that program, I mean, in my case, I think I only took a half payout. And it was like 10 grand for something like 10 years of service that I had in at the time. So there could be people out there with 30 years of service in there. You could be looking at a total amount of something like $60,000 for somebody that's in that boat. And so this is stuff that would have been incorporated into their retirement plans. So people's lives are being ruined, across the board, I think, and especially in the military. If you're 5F'd and you can't get access to a government job, you're in a real rough way, and it's all because you didn't get on that bandwagon to give General Iyer those vaccine numbers that he wanted in the press. And, that's kind of what they've been chasing. And I want to comment a little bit because I do this on the show quite a bit. I'm always talking about Strauss-Howe generational theory and how they predicted this the current crisis back in 1990. And just because of my military background with the CAF, you know, I've gained a few insights, I think, from my experience, and also with this kind of generational lens that I've been learning more and more about. And the funny thing, it's not so funny, about Canadian Armed Forces and what they call our scandal-plagued military, is that if you go back and you look at all those scandals, what you will find at the center is Boomer Mail. And going all the way back to Somalia, this kind of has been the MO. You know, there was Private Kyle Brown, who had something like 3 years in the military when he deployed to Somalia. He was barely qualified as a paratrooper, and he got bullied into participating in the torture and beating to death of Ariel Sharon, who was a 16-year-old Somalian boy that he was sent there to help. And out of his whole unit, basically everybody having known what happened, he was the only guy who came forward and gave us the pictures that showed us all what they were really up to over there. And he was the guy who ended up doing 5 years in prison, and the only guy to go to prison over the whole affair. And he wrote a book called Scapegoat in collaboration with Peter Worthington. And the subtitle was How the Army Betrayed Kyle Brown. But it's not really the Army. It's just that one generation that, you know, when they found out about the torturing and killing of that Somalian boy, they all worked together to cover it up in NDHQ and the military police across the board in order to maintain the favorable optics for the chain of command. And that's what I saw happen with a lot of the sexual misconduct, even. You know, where complainants were being forced out, like the case of Master Corporal Stephanie Raymond, which I don't believe that we actually have a courts martial finding in her allegation yet. But we do know that after submitting her complaint, that the chain of command submitted fraudulent documents in order to push for her release. So it's more of that kind of scapegoating and throwing the troops under the bus that I've seen. Going all the way back to Somalia, and now they're running around telling everybody they're institutionally racist when I never heard the N-word in my entire career, with the exception of watching those tapes in Somalia. So the generation of leadership that gave us the Somalia affair and the cover-up is the Boomer generation, and that's General Ayer's generation. And so if you want to know like what's been going on in the military for the last 30 years, just look at who's been running it. It is the same people that have been around the entire time, you know, and they are the ones who didn't go to the gym and were not deployable and therefore not employable. But because they didn't do their deployments and didn't go to the gym, they tend to suffer the lowest rates of injury, and so they're still kind of hanging around there in NDHQ, really clogging up all the ranks and raising the retirement age so they can stay even longer and be even older.
Well,
at
and
the end of it. So,
we're so top heavy.
yeah.
Last I heard, from Colonel up, we've got 126 people in seats.
Yep.
For a military our size, especially since we're 12,000 less now, we should have about 26. So we've got 100 too many high ranks looking for something to do.
Vance played a big role in that too. He created a whole bunch of new generalships, and I'll tell you, I was subordinate to one of those generals. He made DG Cyber, which is something we really need because distance in cyberspace is zero, folks. And so, I mean, all of our adversaries are right at the doorstep when it comes to things like securing, say, the Canada Pension Plan or the military pension plan. There's a real danger there, and we know that they're basically engaged in every aspect of warfare except the kinetic aspect of it at this point. Yet we still have these retired colonels in NDHQ that are saying, if you want to make that public service position that pay grade, then that's a supervisory position. So he needs to be bilingual. And we're just like, no, you can't keep doing this. Like we need somebody with Asperger's in this position because they're just going to code. Like they're not leaders, they're not supervisors, they're not developing the next generation or any of that. They're just geeks.
Yeah.
But they're still kind of playing politics, with our security in that way. And it's the same, I think, careerism. Like the report on Somalia said that they found that the chain of command was sort of woefully careerist. They tended to blame the lower ranks for their leadership failures. They lied to the commission, and they destroyed documents, and they never really knew the full extent of the affair because of the cover-up that took place. And that has been the MO for the last 30 years. You just throw that little guy under the bus. And
yeah, well, a recent example of hiding documents was what happened with Admiral Norman.
Mm-hmm.
The whistleblower came out and said, the reason you're not finding any of his emails or his messages or his notes is because it's been saved in a way it can't be found on a search.
Yeah.
That spectacularly blew up on him. Let's be honest. They went after Norman because he was a stand-up guy, had a fantastic reputation. The Navy was due for a CDS position. He was the guy, and they came after him. And full credit to him that he hired who he did for a lawyer. And you notice how fast they settled after Vance was questioned by his lawyer.
Right. And that was Marie Heinen. She was she's kind of the Canadian goddess of law around here.
Yeah, she's a real pit bull. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, me too. She's most famous for the Gomeshi case, so a lot of people give her flack for that. But I followed that case.
She did her job, though.
She did her job.
I got full respect for how she pulled it off.
She took them to school. She took them to school in that.
Well, if you're going to do acts of coercion and collusion, be prepared when you have to step into a courtroom or even into questioning before we ever get to trial. A lawyer that can put it all together is a formidable thing to go up against. I know I wouldn't represent myself in a lawsuit. Right. I want somebody else there to protect me.
You need to be at arm's distance too. I think it's hard not to get that emotional investment getting in the way. When you're too close to it too.
Lawsuits are brutal. It's a real marathon. It takes a lot of resilience to get through one.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. I can see even just I'm going through some stuff legally now too for the whole affair in Ottawa and the like. And it's a hell of a thing to have to listen to them present a case against you. When here I've never been in trouble with the law my entire life, and I've got a distinguished career of 20 years, and you're garbage when you step in there as far as that prosecutor is concerned. So it can be really stressful even for the folks that are just sitting on the witness stand. But this is the kind of thing that people really need to be getting into right now, I think. There's a kind of lawfare that's taking hold. A lot of people are filing their complaints. I'm always talking about human rights complaints, about, you can take things to civil court. You've got Brian Peckford pursuing the charter challenge and so on and so forth.
I've got my popcorn ready. I can't wait because as a lawyer, I know that the Crown is going to have to, the only way they can get out of it not being part of the Constitution when you've got a writer of the Constitution on the stand is you have to say that's not what they meant when they wrote the Constitution.
Right.
That's the avenue of attack. They have to take that the way the Constitution is written is being interpreted wrong. Their interpretation is correct. I can't wait for them to say to Brian Peckford, that's not what you meant when you were there writing the Constitution, because just from what I've seen of him, the answer back is going to be classic. So I can't wait because it's just like, I would not want to be that Crown lawyer. I don't envy them that day in court.
No. And he is a formidable guy too. He's a force to be reckoned with,
Yeah. When I first saw his stuff coming out, I was definitely tracking and I was cheering him on. It's like, yes.
Yeah, me too. And actually, I meant to give a note on the Admiral Norman thing too, for anybody who didn't track that closely. That was when we had the election in 2015, and the Harper government had actually pushed through this whole sole source contracting mechanism in the government of Canada, where you could not send a contract out for the usual 3 bids from industry, and you could sole source it for under exceptional circumstances. And it was all because the Navy was falling apart because their refuelers were rust buckets. And they need these refuelers. They're basically just floating gas cans. And so when they're doing deployed operations, elsewhere in the world, the refuelers just kind of go back and forth between our shores. They pick up fuel and they take it back out to the fleet that's at the high seas. And if you don't have those, then you don't really have
You don't have a fleet.
you don't have a fleet. No, you have a Coast Guard.
Yeah. And not much of one at that.
So when the Liberals came in, all things Harper became verboten, and they said that they were going to take another look at this contract, and knowing that would be disastrous for the Navy, as in utterly ruinous for the Navy in terms of its operational capabilities. Admiral Norman apparently slipped the guys over at the company that had the sole source contract there a little notification that they should get their lawyers involved before the government kills it. And so they did, and we ended up getting the asterisks, and he did save the Navy, but for going against the political leaders of the day, he was the subject of a witch hunt where the RCMP actually raided his home in the middle of the night to just to intimidate him and toss his house and take his computer and get all this stuff about whatever correspondence he had with the company. But it wasn't a matter of national security, not even remotely.
No.
The worst thing he could be accused of is maybe having some conflict of interest, where he was getting some kind of a kickback or something like that, but nothing like that was even so much as alleged.
No. There was no evidence of that at all.
None.
Yeah.
And this thing went on for like 2 years. He ended up getting an apology on the floor of the House of Commons in the end, and a settlement, I gather, but he won't say whether a non-disclosure agreement was part of that settlement. So I suspect that it is, especially in light of the fact that he said he had a story to tell Canadians, and then he never did. But I think the story, because I dove into this a little deeper for another presentation I did while I was in uniform too, and the story seems to be that we have an authoritarian culture in Canada, especially within the apparatchiks of the state. And it really does appear to be the case that the PCO, on behalf of PMO, called the RCMP, and then the RCMP engaged, and they did so aggressively and it flew in the face of a lot of normally accepted practices with the raid and so on and so forth. So they went through all this, and then they were at trial, and the Crown prosecutor mentioned some kind of an email that they were relying upon from the PCO, and they were invoking attorney-client privilege, or I think, what is it that we call it in Canada? It's okay.
Yeah.
So they were invoking attorney-client privileges over that email, and it was Marie Heinen that said, well, the PCO is not your client. You're a provincial Crown attorney. That means you work for the taxpayer, not for PCO, Privy Council office, or PMO, the Prime Minister's office. But that's basically what they were doing, and once they got called out on it, they kind of snapped out of it. And I saw this a lot throughout the course of my career. It's just somebody in charge says a thing, and everybody goes, "That's the thing, so this is what we're doing," and they just hop on that bandwagon and go. And the only thing that's really guiding them is their careerism, this pleasing their boss.
And you know what? They seem to have forgotten the lesson of Nuremberg.
100%.
Just because it's an order doesn't mean you're supposed to carry it out.
Yep, that's.
That was a drastic circumstance at Nuremberg, but that was the lesson of. And you know what? Canadian Armed Forces had this reputation of having smart people on the ground, people who could adapt and use their brains and come out of situations that even the Americans say they couldn't do it. To switch from a battle stance to a peacekeeper stance against the same people, that's flexibility in our armed forces is one of the best things that we produced. And that's getting lost as well, because you're getting the chain of command. When this mandate directives came out, they were all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody was doing it consistently. Everybody was doing their own thing, dependent on where I was talking to the Pacific Fleet, or I was talking to the Edmonton base, or I was talking to Moose Jaw for the Air Force. Every commander was doing it differently, their own interpretation of what that actually meant.
Mm-hmm.
And, and now I understand they're getting a little nervous.
I sure hope so.
Because, they're going to be, our goal is to hold them to account.
Yeah.
Explain why the directive says that the commanding officer has the power to decide on the accommodations and remedial measures. Tell me why that was removed from them and all the decisions were being made by the brigade commander all of a sudden, instead of the CO that was supposed to be doing it.
Right. The guy who was closest to it.
Yeah. Why is the vice admiral of the Pacific Fleet making the decisions on who's getting out and who's getting remedial measures, when it should have been the captain of the ship?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it had anything to do with health, then it would have been handled at the lowest level.
Mm-hmm.
But since it had everything to do with numbers, it was handled at a higher level. So again, it's all about producing those favorable optics for the guys in charge.
Yeah.
And since we mentioned the purge, I suppose I should also note that that a similar thing is happening in the public service as well. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if National Defense was a little bit more ruthless with their vaccine policy than the other departments. But yeah, I mean, if you're not of this authoritarian mindset where whatever the guy in charge says is true, then your chances are that your career will be short-lived. And so we're moving in this direction rather rapidly, where in order to work with the state, you must be of the same ideological persuasion that they are. And again, we find ourselves in some pretty dangerous territory.
Right. What concerns me is this conception they have that they're above the law.
Yeah.
And
watched it for 20 years.
I'll tell you, from my point of view, a military that says it's above the law of the country they serve is a big problem. And they definitely, I can tell you, General Ayres sees himself as above the law. Yeah. You saw it with Vance saying he was untouchable.
Yep.
And I certainly, when I attempted an injunction, which actually turned out to be a really good recce for intel of how the Crown is going to approach this whole thing, it was very much a case of, I made the point. This is the CDS's directive. Mm-hmm. Who do you appeal to? He's the final authority.
Yeah.
How do you go challenge him when he's not going to give? There's going to be no leeway because he's the guy that's making the decision.
Yeah, he's got a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
they and you know what? They pay no regard for that stuff. I mean, I was the ethics guy and all that stuff, and it's just unbelievable what I've seen guys do, like with these with harassment complaints, with grievances, and it's always about pleasing their boss. And I've been there having to advise somebody who was vastly superior to me in rank as a workplace relations advisor, to say, no, you cannot delegate this grievance against you to your subordinate. You still have a conflict of interest because you're his boss. Yeah. So you could just tell him to do whatever, you need him to do with that complaint.
Well, but even the suggestion that they could, even if they didn't, it's just the illusion of it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And there seems to be, I keep saying self-righteousness, but it does seem to be the case that at the highest levels, they seem to think that if they do it, then it is good.
Right. And let's face it, we still have, as much as we're grasping on it with the our fingertips, we still have the rule of law in Canada.
Right.
Nobody is above the law.
Right.
And so that's what my group is looking forward to, is holding the CDS to account. Like, okay, This is what you wanted to bring this in. You wanted to go against all your generals that said, don't do this. This is a bad idea. And you went ahead and did it anyway. So I can hold you accountable in a court of law.
No regard for people's lives,
None.
Just playing politics with their lives.
He got rewarded, didn't he? He went from acting to was acting. As soon as he brought in the mandates, boom, full CDS.
Got what he wanted.
Although we still had a CDS officially at the time.
Oh yeah, I guess that was McDonald.
Yeah. I loved watching that theater. That was fun, watching McDonald go, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I hold that job.
Yeah.
Now you got two at the same time.
Yeah, that was quite a drama. And I've been watching it my whole career, and this clown show just gets worse and worse. And it really is kind of all about the careers, right? Like Iyer, he'll do anything. He'll do whatever it takes.
Well, he's shown that. You know, when people show you who they are, believe them. Well, he's shown that he'll do whatever it takes to have that fancy uniform.
Yep.
And who knows what retirement will look like for him? Might be a very generous retirement.
I would bet that it would be. We have other examples out there of previous generals, like Maynard, who got fired from Afghanistan for carrying on an open affair with his civilian admin assistant and negligently discharging his weapon twice, once in front of the chief of defense staff. He was the guy. I think they bumped him down to colonel ultimately, but he still got a really handsome pension at the end of it. And then he used the relocation policy to move across the street in Ottawa, so he would get all those swanky benefits. And then they come in with new policies that are tighter on the rest of us, on the newer generations coming up, saying it's going to be harder for you to move because this general took advantage of the system back in the day. So
that's something you lose with a 5F, by the way.
You lose what?
The move.
Oh yeah, you would. Yeah, you would. You lose your move, so you're stranded basically.
How about the people that were in the PMQs?
Right.
I know of one family that's living in a holiday trailer on Vancouver Island because they got kicked out in 21 days or something from their PMQ, and there's nowhere to rent there. Right. And he managed to find some work there. Yeah. But so they're basically homeless. Years of service. These are not the troublemakers that are being booted out. These are people with chests full of medals, which are not easy to get in Canada. This is not the US where we give you, a medal for showing up for PT, and not a mark on their record. There was one lady that she's got 29 years in. She was in Bosnia and all the others. Her husband dying of cancer. He's terminally ill. She had only a few months to go to get her 25-year pension. And they 5F'd her. So she didn't get her 25-year pension. She had to move her terminally ill husband from Wainwright to another home. And he didn't have very much longer. I'll get my blood pressure up just thinking about the injustice of this, what they're doing to people who gave their whole lives to the Canadian Armed Forces. Never ever step foot wrong, and and now they're morally weak and need to be gone.
Yeah. I know I've had enough of it. I've been seeing it for 20 years, and just in my own careful observations, it really is that same generation that's been behind it the whole time.
Well, look what they did to that kid in Quebec. In January. He didn't want to take the vaccine, and his commanding officer made him stand outside. Quebec in January was brutal.
Right.
Every day he stood outside where his coworkers went past him every day. He lasted a month before he lost 15 pounds of muscle mass, and he could not physically take it anymore. And he voluntarily. And I've got a group of senior vets who are watching out for this kid because he is not doing well mentally. He is. Not doing well at all.
Well, that's a socially abusive practice that he's been subjected to there.
If you did that to a prisoner of war, you'd be in The Hague being charged with war crimes.
Yeah, no doubt.
And that we have, this is a commanding officer.
Mm-hmm.
She decided that this was an appropriate thing to do to one of her own people.
Mm-hmm.
And
they're
this
charged
is our leadership?
Yeah. And leadership in the Canadian Armed Forces, I mean, they're charged with safeguarding the well-being of their subordinates,
Right.
505 and 506.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, probably the last thing in any of our leaders' minds these days.
Mhm.
It really is all
Where's
about
her
numbers.
court martial?
Great question. I won't hold my breath for that one.
No.
It's clearly harassment. I mean, it's intended to humiliate them. It's discriminatory on the basis.
It's torture.
Yeah.
Let's put the word on it. It's torture. Because in The Hague, it would be considered torture.
Omar Khadr got 10.5 million for being deprived of sleep while he was in Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
That's the bar that we're setting here. And,
I hear that a lot.
yeah. And I do hear it a lot in the veteran community too. There was that young guy, veteran of Afghanistan, who got up at one of the Trudeau rallies. And the quote that keeps circulating is how he wasn't prepared for Canada to turn its back on me and stuff like that. And you know what, I felt that myself. Like I never got any satisfaction out of medical services. They're not really there to provide medical services. They're there to provide medically credentialed bureaucrats to administer your release if you become burdensome to the CAF system, which we all pay for, by the way. But yeah, that's what the health services are really there for.
I'll never forgive Justin Trudeau for standing up and saying you're asking for more than we can give.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same one. And
when I heard that, I just,
And the thing is, he answered the question that he wanted to have asked, not the question that he was actually asked, because what he was being asked, the guy said, you said that veterans wouldn't have to fight in court anymore and that they would be getting the support from the government. And he was using that compare and contrast between the case of Omar Khadr and the veterans group in court and saying, and he asked him, so when you said that we would be getting that veterans would be getting what they deserve from the federal government, which veteran were you talking about? That was the question that he was asking. Are you talking about Canadian veterans or are you talking about Al-Qaeda veterans?
Right.
Because that seems to be the how it shaped up, how it shook out anyway. And I mean, I think we have more evidence than ever to show us that they're not really on our side.
We have a really good example of how the government of Canada, through Veterans Affairs Canada, is going to handle the veterans.
Yes, we do. I have an article here that I pulled up ahead of time. I'll show you. So this is Fox News, and oddly enough, I've been finding them to be more and more a source of information in Canada because we can't rely on our own press to report on what our government is doing to us.
But our Prime Minister paid our press very well for their representation.
Oh yeah, they did. What are they up to? $1.5 million or $1.5 billion just at CBC? Unreal. So the title here is Canadian soldiers suffering with PTSD offered euthanasia by Veterans Affairs. Medical assistance in dying or euthanasia was legalized in Canada in 2016. So it says Canadian Armed Forces veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and a traumatic brain injury was offered medical assistance in dying by an employee of Veterans Affairs Canada. The VAC released a statement last week admitting that an incident, quote, where medical assistance in dying was discussed inappropriately, close quote, with the veteran. The department pledged that, quote, appropriate administrative action will be taken, close quote, after the veteran expressed outrage at the suggestion, according to a report in Global News. According to the report, the veteran called VAC seeking support for PTSD when the employee brought up medical assistance in dying or euthanasia unprompted. The veteran was reportedly shocked by the suggestion. His family told Global News that the soldier had been making positive progress in his physical and mental rehabilitation and that he felt betrayed by an agency that is tasked with assisting veterans. The veteran's ordeal has since raised fears that the exchange may not have been an isolated incident, leading to questions about how often the agency has offered or discussed MAID with those suffering from PTSD. The agency since has apologized to the veteran in follow-up call after the incident resulted in several complaints, with the VAC saying it, quote, deeply regrets what transpired, close quote. Canada legalized MAID in 2016 with the 2021 amendments broadening eligibility for those requesting the procedure. People suffering from mental disorders will also be allowed to access to MAID starting in 2023. But discussing MAID with veterans is not within the scope of Veterans Affairs Canada, an agency in charge of the care of population already at higher risk of suicide. So I think that's basically the bottom line in this article here. But yeah, that's there's a lot of misinformation in the media about this. I find that they're always kind of stigmatizing the issue of veteran mental health. They seem to be determined to make some link between PTSD and violence toward others, but that's not really a symptom of PTSD. The real risk is suicide. It's not murder.
Well, I can tell you that I've stood in a courtroom and had a judge say that anyone who has served in the military will kill themselves, not may, will kill themselves and may kill their children.
Really?
I have. And
anyone in the military?
And he got shut down on appeal because my back was stiff. There were veterans in the room. My guy had PTSD. He had no criminal activity whatsoever. It was a parenting issue. And the veterans who were behind me were talking about how I would not sit down and how stiff my back was. And it was like, I'll respect the bench, but I'm not respecting the person that's on it for saying that. When it got to the appeal, the first thing the justice hearing the appeal said to me was, well, Ms. Christensen, it looks like you had a rough morning. Yes, my lady, I did. And she tossed it for that. So yeah, I faced that directly from our courts, but you know, the last group you offer medically assisted suicide is veterans. Right. I've looked after veterans. I've sent police for wellness checks and been too late. You know, it broke my heart as much as it enraged me when the story broke. I know Angry Cops did a video on it, and in his video, he talks about this veteran when they're asked this person at VAC. They said, well, I've already advised someone who did it, but I gave don't worry, I gave his children counseling. This guy was a father who called for help, and this person admitted that they'd already helped someone have medically assisted. But I guess, you know, right now you for mental health, you'd have to go to Belgium or Switzerland. I guess a one-way ticket there is cheaper than paying for the care of a veteran who needs mental health support.
Right.
It's just ridiculous. I mean,
yeah, it is.
MAID is now the sixth leading cause of death in Canada.
Yeah.
But it so wrong. And my understanding, this person is still on the phone with Veterans Affairs.
Yeah, and that's unacceptable. This is, I think there's a kind of infatuation here with euthanasia, with this particular individual from the sounds of things, because they're even saying that this isn't a service that's offered by VAC.
Right.
So they're
should
going
never
way
even
outside their mandate.
It shouldn't even be in their head when they're talking to someone who's called for help. I mean, this is not someone that they've reached out to. This guy, the steps he had to take in his head to actually pick up the phone and talk to Veterans Affairs, and then it's better than blowing your brains out. What? Like what?
Yeah.
You know, I got guys trying to commit suicide by cop who luck out, and one of the cops who responds happens to be a veteran and realizes what's going on.
Yeah.
The
whole, you know, we have strategies now in the Canadian Armed Forces, or at least we have strategic guidance. We have documents, which, like I say, are more for the purpose of providing the window dressing that the people in charge need to provide them with this air of legitimacy. But we have CAF strategic guidance on suicide prevention. And the reason I would say predominantly for my generation of veterans to seek help from Veterans Affairs these days is for PTSD, PTSI related mental health issues, chiefly depression is the one that is that correlates with suicidality the most. And that is the dirty little secret in the CAF, is that we have a higher rate of depression than the general population. And, they're not able to come up with any reason for it, but I'll tell you, it's just the terribly abusive leadership that they have there, where nobody follows the rules. And anytime you even so much as suggest that maybe we want to consult with the policy before determining a decision, then you're the troublemaker, and you just get gaslit and question your own sanity for and so now these guys are out, and who knows what else they saw while they were overseas, and they've just been kind of abused and taken for granted and left out by the curb with yesterday's garbage, and they're coming to Veterans Affairs to make them whole again and help them to feel human again, and they're being told, well, maybe you just want to leave this planet then, huh?
Yeah, that's, well, if you're going to do force reduction on the active side, you might as well do reduction of claims on the other side. I mean, let's face it, that's pretty much what looks like going on.
From soup to nuts, people are essentially livestock at this point in Canada. You get on board with this vaccine policy to get the big pharma guys rich, or you're cut out of any employment with the state. And so we have this lucrative merger of corporation and state, aka fascism.
Which is interesting, because that's usually a conservative thing. That's usually what the conservatives get accused of doing.
I think that's it is kind of one of those things where they're always accusing everybody else of what they themselves are doing.
There's another Viva Barnes. They confession by projection.
That's a good way of putting it.
That's what I call it.
They're just projecting all of their own awfulness onto the rest of us.
So when I see something coming across my desk, it's like, okay. I do have to tell you that I didn't expect, when I started down the mandate lawsuit last October, that every single one of my suspicions would end up being proven in a way. And when I say proven, I mean in a way that I could present it to a court, proven with evidence that every single piece of corruption and abuses that I suspected, I've got evidence for. So
that's good.
It's as a lawyer, it's like, I can't believe I can prove all this. Like every day something comes across my desk, like, oh, okay, so there's that one. Check.
They're not even good at covering their tracks, really.
No, well, arrogance will do that to you.
Exactly.
If you feel untouchable, you keep going and you keep doing. And Napoleon Bonaparte, a quote from him: "Never get in the way when your enemy's making a mistake."
Yeah, that's right. So I guess
sometimes I have to remind people in patience, just hold on, it's coming. Just let them step right in it.
That's right. And I've been trying to remind folks too, that because there's a lot of frustration in the freedom movement community, and there have been one or two kind of harebrained schemes put forward, as a kind of let's get it all in one fell swoop of a revolution and a single protest. And we've come out against a couple of plans like that here at V4F, because we're like, this isn't smart or safe,
right?
That kind of thing. And
there are different ways to play the chess game.
Yeah. And you're not going to be able to play it if you spend 2 years in jail waiting for a bail hearing. So I mean, unless it's absolutely necessary, and I'm not convinced that it is at this point, then we don't want to be seeing people going to jail like that. But with all that frustration, I've kind of taken to kind of made it my hobby horse now to try to highlight some of our successes, because we do see a lot of these legal fights starting to bear fruit. I mentioned the Peckford legal challenge there, and I saw something. Rocco Galati, after he got out of a coma, actually scored a victory there at some point. And so these things are making their way through the system. And
the U.S., they're having terrific success, especially on the military front.
Is that right?
on this. Yes, the Marines just won a big one.
Okay.
Yeah, the
That's
Navy has one, the Air Force has. Yeah, and they're coming after them now for using their troops as experimental
good.
subjects.
Good.
That's the latest one that I've heard. But yeah, no, they're getting a lot of success in the U.S. on the military front. So
good. That's good. And we're going to be talking a little bit more on the podcast coming up about, failing to learn these lessons, to follow the Nuremberg Code, because we just had this whole affair with mefloquine in the 90s. And, so you think that they would at least be a little bit more careful when it
you would
comes
think.
to administering
I mean,
drugs.
I know someone who was on that plane to Somalia when they mefloquine was a new drug to fight malaria. It had never been trialed on humans before. They put the airborne on an aircraft and they handed out the pills. Those guys were the test subjects, human test subjects for mefloquine. And, there's part of me that has to wonder if the whole thing that went completely sideways in Somalia had something to do with mefloquine. Because I've heard about crazy Tuesdays in Afghanistan, guys sitting on you don't go on patrol because they're sitting on their cots, petting their rifle like it's their dog. So you have to wonder about some of the side effects here, especially that drug was so brand new. Who knows what dose they were given?
And
they just took it. They're like, okay.
Yeah, they just took it.
And now we've got a generation going, I'm not just going to take it. Now, hold on. I got questions to ask you,
Yeah, that's right. And they're doing what they should. And I see that a lot with, because I'm right in the middle, I finished my career kind of in those middle ranks that Vance was talking about. So, I was an MWO and a sergeant major, and I spent a lot of time behind closed doors with decision makers, so I kind of got to see what they were really like behind closed doors. And it is that kind of ruthless careerism too. And you mentioned how they were sort of experimented on, and who knows how much of the violence over there that took place may have been some kind of may have been exacerbated, I guess, by some of the side effects that they were feeling from that. But at the same time, we still had the guy who came back and realized what they did over there was wrong, and still had the temerity to come forward with the evidence, and still got thrown under the bus by the chain of command and all the way up through NDHQ, and there was no mefloquine in NDHQ at that time, right? So and what I see, I guess, is the younger generations are coming in, like me, and filing their grievances and saying, well, no, you guys don't own this institution. It belongs to all of us, and we're all expected to execute our duties to Canada in good faith. And so when I see, bad faith leadership, then I'll slip my complaint in there wherever possible and pursue it that way. And I think the millennials are similarly minded. But they're what I hear from the highest ranks is that they're entitled, and they're spoiled and stuff like that. I'm like, no, I don't think so. I think they're civic minded.
They're holding you to account, is what they're doing.
That's right.
And let's face it, if you're a senior command and you're getting a policy and procedure quoted back to you that's been applied wrong, if you don't like it, why aren't you changing it? Because you're the power seat. So and I have to tell you that after we did the injunction application in December, and the justice said, well, for some of this stuff you need to use the grievance system first, which is the standard court blocking anything military. So I said to all of my people, I said, break the system. Don't file big grievances, file little every single thing you can come up, file a grievance. And now they're so bogged down in grievances, they can't even move. I think it was the Dalai Lama quote was, learn the rules so you know how to break them.
Yeah, that's
so and people were like, well, what's the point? The grievance it's going to get rejected. I said, yeah, I know, but I want you to break the system. I need to be able to stand up in a courtroom and say, these people tried to use the system that's in place and they can't use the system because it's so broken. And I've got a Supreme Court Justice Fish who did the report. You know, the report's this thick, and he's saying the system's broken.
CAF
So,
grievances.
yeah. So here's another exhibit for the lawsuit. Plus, here's all these hundreds of people who tried to use the system that doesn't work.
No.
So.
No, it's a ruse. It's another one of those things that I think's there for the optics. They can say, "Oh yeah, we've got this this great system," but like you pointed out, it all leads back to the same decision makers, you know.
Yep.
And so you end up with these conflicts of interests that are never managed properly.
Right.
And all the ombudsman saying that the chain of command can't police itself. And really, the answer, and I could have given you this when I was probably a master corporal, was to reform the ombudsman's office into something like an inspector general, which they have down in the United States, to receive all complaints and administer all complaints and report directly to Parliament, not back to Minister of Stolen Valor, who's just going to sweep all that sexual misconduct stuff about Vance under the rug because it doesn't look good for him politically.
Right. Well, plus they had to, in order to court-martial Vance, they had to come up with a quorum of officers, and they couldn't do it. They didn't have enough people of that rank to do the hearing. That's why he said he was untouchable, because he knew they couldn't come up with a panel for a court-martial.
Yeah.
So who does I asked the court this? I said, who does the CDS answer to? He directs the military, but who does he answer to if he does something wrong?
And by what mechanism is he answerable?
And how do we say he's done something wrong? He's made a command that's wrong. Where do you go? You can't.
And they don't
He's
have
the top of the chain.
Yep.
And no one has come up with an answer for me yet.
Yeah. I mean, it's really good to hear. I think that this is the kind of thing, like I try to tell people too. I mean, if you're out there, file your complaints. If you're still in the military, file your complaints. I think you're giving them really good advice there. Like, bog down the whole system. Let everybody know just how dissatisfied we really are with how that institution's being run.
Well, and when those bureaucrats are so overloaded working from home, they get really unhappy. And when they get really unhappy, things start to change. Things don't change. If you don't use it, you say it's useless, I'm not going to do it.
That's right.
You're not helping. You need to help me break it. Help me break it into a million pieces so they have to do something else, as an alternative.
I'll highlight one success here. I'll tell you. I mean, I have had mixed experience with the grievance process myself. And I know that, but this is just the way it is. Like, I filed a grievance in 2013 for a PER, but it wasn't because it was terribly low. It was because they had changed my score when it went to the formation board. And this is a widespread problem that's going on everywhere. And they're not allowed to do this, right? Like, the people that I never even met are saying, well, you're not our favorite guy, so you don't get our favorite guy score. You get the next favorite guy score. And assigning scores to supervisors. And it's just completely upside down and backwards. But it saves effort for the generals of having to earn their six-figure salaries. Anyway, I told them for years, like, you're not allowed to do this, and here's the policy. And I got raked over the coals and told that I was a troublemaker every time. And then when they did it to me, I was like, okay, well, I guess I got to put my money where my mouth is and file my grievance. And it took a while. I got medically repatriated mysteriously for a year-and-a-half-old injury. After filing that grievance, and there's nothing you can do about it. You go to your next posting before you'd ever hear back on a grievance or anything like that. And sure enough, when I did hear back, here we had the Chief of Defense Staff, General Vance at the time, sending a letter out to all of the commanders saying, here's the reference that Evely told you to follow. start following it. It wasn't just me. Like, there was a large number of complaints for the same reason reaching the final authority. And when they see a trend like that, then it compels them to act. You got to light a fire under their asses to get them to do the right thing. That's the fact of the matter.
Well, and you take these vaccine mandate grievances, when they hit the final authority. I've had clients for other things, and it takes years to get a decision from the final authority, and that's before we overloaded it. So all AIR has to do is leave those sitting on a corner of his desk till he retires.
Yep.
And
100%.
leave it for the next guy.
Yep.
I had one guy that went through 3 CDSs before we got a decision.
Oh, God.
You know, I mean,
yeah.
and he's out trying to build a life, not sure if he's going to be successful to get back in, or
Get back in the military.
He originally wanted to. He doesn't anymore.
Yeah. Okay. I'm kind of curious about what a lot of folks are thinking out there right now.
From my own group, I can tell you none of them want to come back in.
No,
They're done. They're done.
Why would you want to work for people like that?
Yeah.
They're just exploiting it, you know, and it's really, you know, disheartening to have to say it, but you know, sometimes you just got to let the system fail, folks. And I think this is one of those times. And here we are talking about a military and our ability to defend our country. We can't do it now. Like,
No.
We don't really have a military. We have a dog and pony show. And
I mean, 5 years ago, the joke was here in Edmonton is they were going to grab whatever they could and head to the mountains till the Americans showed up. That was a standing joke around at the base in Edmonton.
Yeah.
But now I don't know if there's any equipment worth grabbing to get with to the mountains.
No. And that's just it, though. I mean, there's nobody coming to save us. You know, we got to do it ourselves. And it really is, I think, kind of everybody getting engaged in the way that you're encouraging them to engage, to file your grievances, file your human rights complaints, take people to court. And it's not going to happen right away. You got to be patient with it. Like, we're in a war here, and you're not going to win it with a single battle. Okay?
Oh yeah, if you think the army grinds slowly, the courts are even worse.
Oh my, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good message anyway. I think it's a good example to be setting, and I hope that more of our viewers will be inspired to perhaps engage in some kind of process to hold decision makers to government.
I can tell you a lot of lawyers, if you reach out to most lawyers, they're going to tell you can't sue the government.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
Right.
So if you want to do a legal process, you're going to have to search for that lawyer that's willing to do it and take it on. So,
and a lot of them aren't even taking on, like, you know, mask mandate stuff at this point.
Well, that was actually part of my motivation when I took this on in October, was anger at my own profession, because people told me that they had reached out to other lawyers and were told things like, don't come near my office, don't call me again, like shutting them down. And that completely unnecessary, because it's easy enough for a lawyer to say, I don't practice that kind of law. I have too many clients right now. I'm not taking any new clients. There's a diplomatic way of doing it, but to absolutely trash these people just for saying I'd like a legal opinion, that reflects really badly on my profession. I was disgusted. Like,
Thank you.
Different way of handling it than they did.
Yeah.
And now you notice that as the lawsuits ramp up, all of a sudden there's all these lawyers willing to take on cases because they see the money. They see the money. They're
doing the Pierre Poilievre. They're getting on that freedom bandwagon.
Yeah.
Now that there's a bandwagon for them to jump onto, they're all about it.
Yeah. And now it's, you know, as more and more comes out about the vaccine and the mandates and the cases start to get lost in court, but it's like, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Something going on here. And the more information there is out there, like the more we're going to see come washing out of this.
It's only just started.
Yeah, we're just starting to see the cracks in the dam. I mean, just wait until that sucker busts.
Yeah.
And people start to realize the full extent of,
well, you know, if the CDS is stupid enough to bring in mandatory boosters, I already have thousands of people have contacted me and said they won't take the booster and they're ready to go for another big lawsuit.
That's
for the boosters.
Hear.
So because of the information that's come out and because of the way the people who chose not to take it were treated, people were unhappy. Morale was bad in the CAF before this, really and bad. Now there is no trust in the chain of command.
Nor should there be.
When you have no trust in your chain of command, you don't have a military.
No, I mean, all of this is very much congruent with my experience in the military too, and I'll say it again. I mean, those leaders are basically just exploiting all the best Canadians who all decided to take on unlimited liability by putting on the Canadian Armed Forces uniform on behalf of all of us, and this is the way all those greatest people are being treated. Like they're being treated like not just livestock, but character deficient livestock.
Yeah, yeah.
For that,
You know.
so and they're really like demoralizing doesn't really do it justice. It's kind of like psychological abuse. You know,
well, it's a psyop.
Yeah,
it really is a psyop on their own people.
Yep.
And it worked spectacularly. I have to tell you, the psychological and moral damage that they've done to these people, it'll never be able to be compensated. What they've done to these people. I've had attempted suicides and stuff in my group from people that just cannot cope with what is happening. So. Yeah,
I believe it. And I mean, we're talking about people who
I won't let them call back. They're not allowed to call back. Reach out to my group of people that circle the wagons and help them out.
And I think we're recognizing more and more as of late that peer support is probably the way to go with the veterans. I mean, I've been through therapy myself. It really is a matter of fit. I think the first lady that I went to, I remember just kind of sitting down in her office and everything was very nice and swanky. And there are all these books around on the shelf about PTSD. And I'm like, but you're just some middle-class lady. Like, you know, how could you even relate to anything that I'm saying? It really just kind of seems like it's an industry now, you know, and there are plenty of opportunistic careerist types out there that are willing to festoon their fancy offices with all the books about PTSD. But at the end of the day, they're just kind of printing stuff off the internet for me to take home and read. And I'm like, I got internet at home. So
exactly.
Yeah.
How about something that actually works instead of just something you read about?
Yeah. And the relatability, I think, is a big one.
I consider it such an honor that people have put their trust in me to be their voice and represent them, because I know the trust is not easily given. I've worked hard to have that trust, and it's very precious to me to keep that trust. So I have been challenged by the Law Society for representing military. I was told I'm too close to my clients, that I needed to not represent military and represent someone else, another group. And I just refused. I was like, no, this is my group. These are my people. And I won't apologize for calling them. I got criticized for saying my guys. And I was like, well, but if I was a light colonel in charge of a battalion and I called them my guys, it means male and female, and they wouldn't even blink. Whereas am I saying my guys? So
and that's kind of you're expressing a feeling of responsibility for your clients when you say my guys. That's called taking ownership, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And I do feel responsible for them. So
and I would say that about, you know, my subordinates in the military. I mean, they're my guys. And it's that I think that's a really important attitude to have as a senior NCO too, because, you know, a lot of Reg Force people in particular, they're disconnected from their families. They don't have that social support structure of their hometown where they know everybody, and you know, they have favors they can call in and all this stuff. Like we count on the military people in the place where we're going to provide us with that support. And the NCOs more so, I think, than anybody, kind of form that backbone, that community backbone that you know, kind of keeps it all together. I mean, it really, I think, helps to have somebody in there who's had the experience themselves, who's kind of been through a lot of that, those kinds of abuses at the hands of the chain of command, and who understands, you know, where people are coming from. So if they're you know, if they're investing their trust in you, then I think that that's because you've shown them that there's a level of understanding and compassion there that probably just isn't available to them elsewhere.
Yeah, I have my own war stories. I didn't have a quiet nursing career, so.
I can imagine. Yeah.
When I look them in the eye, we've got a mutual thing about what can happen in the realities of life. And so I can fully appreciate having to do some stuff and see some things that the normal world doesn't see. So I'm happy to represent them. I've always been a supporter of the military. My dad was, I'm going to date myself, but my dad was in the militia, the Calgary Highlanders.
Oh yeah.
So for 4 years. So as a young child, I saw him in a uniform, and I'm pretty sure that's probably where it came from. But yeah, I debated. I'm one of those, I would have joined, but
Oh yeah.
stories. When I finished my nursing career, I actually had the paperwork to join the Navy as a nurse, and it was January, and I heard that they flood a ship with water to practice getting out in a sinking ship, and I was like, I'm going to wait till summer to do that.
Yeah.
and then I got hired at a brand new hospital to do a full-time job. So it was like, okay, well, I won't do that. But it must have been niggling in the back of my mind, because here I am helping military in a different way. So.
And I think that nurses would probably fit in with military fairly easily too. And I think it's because
I did a lot of high risk stuff and things. Yeah.
And I do think it's that kind of grit, that kind of brings
being soaked to my underwear in someone else's blood.
Yeah.
Sending young people to the morgue and stuff. That's I've done it. So I can, like I said, there's war stories that I just exchange with veterans too. So
pretty hard to be an out of touch elitist when you have that kind of experience under your belt.
Right.
Keep you grounded, keep you in touch with reality. And that's very much what you see
when you stare death in the face and it's real. Yeah.
Kind of come to terms with it.
There's a real presence, and and then I've told it to in no uncertain terms where it can go, and it was not going to win that day. So
well, looks like we just crossed over the 2-hour mark there, Catherine, if you can believe that.
It went fast.
It went really fast. I really enjoyed speaking with you here today. I just thought and thanks again for setting such a great example. And getting people motivated to engage in these processes, and for setting up that legal fund. I think this is absolutely imperative, really, for our young people in the military, because nobody is gunning for them.
No. I get calls from across the country. Is there another you? I have chosen now to represent in the federal court, which means you can be anywhere in the country. And Valour Legal Action Center can represent you, because if it's military, I can go into the federal court, and it doesn't have to be restricted to a certain province. So
that's perfect.
Yeah. And I appeal to those who are, even if you're still serving, or if you're a veteran and you've got some sort of legal issue, reach out to us, and we'll take a look at your case and see if there's something we can do to help you. So it goes, we meet with the board and decide on the cases.
Okay. Let me know what you decide when you get to my case.
Okay, I sure will, Jeff.
Right.
You're putting in a plug. I got to write it down.
A little bit.
Sure
I just want to make sure my viewers know that I practice what I preach.
That's right.
I am pursuing a lawsuit against the military, if not multiple. But it's going to take time, and we just got to stay frosty and stay safe.
Yeah.
So with that,
and hi to the CFNIS. I'm sure they're watching me carefully.
I have. I probably have worse people than that watching me.
Right?
So.
Yeah. We're in good company.
That's right. But I'm not one to act on my cowardice.
No. It's not stopping me any. So.
No, nor should it. I think when they're really trying to intimidate and to instill fear in people like this, that just goes to show you that we're over the target.
Right. Exactly. You most flack over the target, right? Yeah.
That's right. All right. Well, thanks again, Catherine, for coming on. It's a real pleasure. And I hope we can have you back on again sometime to give us an update on how things are going.
Sure.
Because we're really interested in knowing what's going on with people back there in that institution. This is all very near and dear to our hearts. So thanks again for taking this up, because it is so badly needed in Canada right now.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Come back anytime.
It's our pleasure. Take care.
Take care.
Okay.